Let me tell you what my deep research and basically vision is.
I hope there's Bigfoot. I don't think there is.
I'm not telling you nothing.
The aliens won't let it happen.
Happening now, breaking.
Bernie Sanders is angry.
Bears beats Battlestar Galactica.
What are the tips? Give me some tips on how to work with Wes Anderson.
Be ready to speak very fast and very clearly, because that's definitely one key thing.
I will only tell the truth.
Until you and 6 kids you barely know in wet bathing suits have surrounded 9 chimpanzees outside of a Wendy's. You probably really don't know yourself, okay?
Yep. And we back.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to your new favorite podcast and the best in political, sports, and paranormal news coverage. I'm your host, Wes Anderson, and this is In the Shed. This is episode 49, so whether you're coming back for more or finding us for the first time this week, hey, thanks for tuning in. My guest tonight is former newspaperman and soon-to-be author, college football historian and analyst Mark Schipper. Mark is the purveyor of fifth down college football on social media and the web and has been heard on ESPN, Sirius XM, and all across major media. I couldn't think of anyone better to have on for our college football preview show. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Yes, sir, Wes. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be with you.
Absolutely. You were the first person that ever reached out about being on our show a little over a year ago. And at that point, I was just getting started. I thought that you were trolling me.
No, I was not. I'm trying to remember. That would have been, was that right before last season started or right in the early parts of the season?
It was.
Yeah, so I was, as I was planning this big Odyssey trip I went on last fall, I was looking for media in local markets, and I wanted to touch on as many levels of media as I could, from the top corporate to the local to the podcast level, because I wanted to get word out on this book. And I don't recall how I saw your podcast, but I did, and saw it was in Alabama, and thought it looked good. So
awesome.
I shouted it out.
Yeah, and you are blowing up, my friend. I'm seeing you everywhere. Our show is growing in India, so
nice.
So there's that. We're still small, but we are in the heart of college football, a region that really takes our football seriously. So I'm stoked to have you on. Let's just start. How about you just share with us about the journey that you embarked on last football season, about the book that you're writing. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So last fall I went on a big, I called it the American Odyssey, coast to coast, all the way around the country. And the purpose of it was to attend in person as many of college football's most historic, most important rivalries, to soak the scene up in person, to participate in it. And one of the reasons I ended up doing it last year is it was triggered a little bit by the COVID season and the shutdowns and all the insanity that went on, not just in this country, but around the world. But college football and college athletics were hit in a very interesting, acute way, which is people kind of saw how important the business side of these athletics were. And what it kind of set in motion was something that I've been calling a revolutionary moment in college sports. And what I realized from a long study of the game was we were going to be going down some of our oldest, most traditional roads for a final time over these coming years. So I wanted to experience that before it kind of went away forever. And as we've seen this offseason and the offseason prior to last, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 for the SEC, this revolutionary moment has really amped up USC, UCLA to the Big 10, etc. So my sort of premise, which is based at bottom in the fact that college football is inseparable from American culture in a very unique way compared to the rest of our sports, it's been playing out in real time. So that was the motivation for what I did, and I'm writing a book on the journey in the sport, and that's just kind of where we're at right now.
Very cool. And what games did you attend?
went to a lot of games. So I picked them based on region. I wanted to cover the entire country, and then historical relevance because I needed each of these either rivalries or schools and programs to tell the story of college football in this country and its place in this country's history. Really, right after the Civil War, it's amazing when college football came to life and how quickly it helped bring this country back together with a unified game that we all love. So I started out west. I went to school at UCLA, so I started at UCLA with LSU in town. Texas, Arkansas, a ton of history to that game. Nebraska, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Alabama, the Red River game, Florida, LSU, Notre Dame, USC, Florida, Georgia, Oregon, Washington, Florida State, Miami, Harvard, Yale, Michigan, Ohio State, then wrapped up with the SEC championship in Army Navy. So it was 15 weeks on the road, and it was a wild fall.
Quite a trip.
It was crazy.
What was your favorite stadium that you visited, Mark?
Yeah, that's a really tough question with the games that I just rattled off because, you know, a big part of the reason I would say why most programs are important is the atmosphere in the stadium they play in, the history of that, their universities, the ballparks built there, et cetera. So I was really at some choice stadiums. The Rose Bowl, where UCLA plays, is beautiful for the Rose Bowl. It can be good for UCLA games if it's a big game, but the Rose Bowl's a special place. You know, picking a favorite is really difficult. I'll tell you one that people should go to that they may not know about, particularly down in the Southeast, is go up to Seattle to Husky Stadium for a big game and watch Washington play. Take the boat in on Lake Washington, sailgate out there, floating on your boat, having a traditional tailgate on the water, and then come up to the stadium. Really cool ballpark. Seattle's a stunning city. Their campus is beautiful. And then that stadium right on the water, looking out over Lake Washington, it's a really cool design. Husky Stadium's a pretty unique place in this sport.
Yeah, and sailgating, man, that would be quite the experience for sure.
Yeah, it's unique. Tennessee and the SEC has something with the volunteer Navy on the river, but it's at a bigger level in Seattle.
Very cool. And what about the best crowd? What game was the most electric in your opinion?
Yeah, you know what? One of the most just exciting atmospheres is the Red River game in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl. With that stadium split 50-50 and the intensity, A, of those fan bases, and B, of their rivalry and how far it goes back and how personal it is between the two fan bases.
Right.
The Red River game, and I had one of the craziest Red River games ever played. I mean, Oklahoma was left for dead. I think they were down 3 scores in the third quarter. The famous Caleb Williams to the rescue. Superman scores, I think, on his first snap of the game. He ran like a 50-yard, 60-yard touchdown and started bringing Oklahoma back. That game was just extremely – that game was so exciting that the Oklahoma crowd stormed the field at the Cotton Bowl at a neutral site, which I've never seen before.
Yeah, that's awesome. A lot of good games. I think going to the Rose Bowl, seeing a game there, the Army-Navy game, those are both games that are on my sports bucket list, something I would love to do. What about the most impressive performance that you saw live? Would it be Caleb Williams in that comeback?
That one was really cool. It came out of nowhere. The Oklahoma fans were so ecstatic when that started going because their offense had really been struggling with Spencer Rattler and people were really getting frustrated. So to watch that thing kind of turn around on just almost like one snap. He took the snap, he ran in for a touchdown. All of a sudden, Oklahoma's offense was on fire. That was quite a performance. Florida LSU played a wild game. It was a lot of ways a big letdown going into the game because Florida was having a bad season. LSU was having a bad season. The game wasn't going to be sold out. They kicked off. I think they had the noon kick.
Right.
Or the 11 a.m. kick when I was anticipating a primetime night game at Tiger Stadium. But those two squads went berserk. Their offenses went back and forth all afternoon, and the defenses couldn't stop them. So that one was exciting. And then maybe Michigan's performance against Ohio State. Michigan's offense just really sliced and diced the Buckeyes. in the snow up in Ann Arbor, and another field storming there. I don't know that Michigan Stadium has ever stormed the field.
Wow.
Fans at Michigan Stadium have ever stormed the field, and they did that there. So those were some of the best, but I got a lot of good games. I really did.
You did. You picked well, and you kind of were living every football fan's dream last year. What do you have planned for this season? What progress have you made on the book? When can we look to buy a copy?
So I talked about the revolutionary moment, what I thought was coming in college football. It's happening faster than I thought it would. So the plan initially was to have the book out quickly this off season, then coming into this year is going to be ready to go. I'm pushing it back into the off season after this season. So I need the things that are happening right now in this book. If I'm going to write a history of this game along with the travel story, I can't leave out what's going on. It's just too sort of sport shattering
For sure.
to not have in the book. So what I'm gonna do this year is I'm gonna round out my tour from last season with a couple supplementary trips, some road stadiums I didn't get to see last year, and then my plan, as long as the CFP isn't too generic again this year, just meaning the same thing again and again and again, I do want to go to the national championship game out at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles and have that as kind of the capstone moment to these 2 seasons worth of journeys.
Yeah, that would be tremendous. A great way to end it for sure. And you kind of have already touched on this, but let's jump right in. Let's talk about conference realignment. You being a UCLA grad, here in previous weeks, UCLA and USC have announced that they're moving to the Big Ten. Of course, the previous year, Oklahoma and Texas announced that they're moving to the SEC. The Big 12 is scrambling and adding some teams in BYU and Houston and UCF and others. What do you make of conference realignment? How do you feel about it? What impact will it have on college football as a whole?
Well, those are big questions. It's major changes. The sport is in a revolutionary period. When I talk about this with people on the radio and wherever else, I talk big revolution, small revolution. We'll see which kind of, and we're in the small revolution now, just to give people an idea of how big the big revolution could be. So what I think we're going to see play out is a few years of this really bizarre alignment with, USC and UCLA and the Big Ten. And then I think we're going to, as they decide on a format for the expanded postseason, that's going to be so crucial to what happens in major college football going forward, is how they set up this postseason. I think we're going to see realignment settle down a little bit. We could actually see, if we get the big revolution I'm talking about, we could actually see some of these structures re-break down into a more rationally regional setup in order to orchestrate a more sensible regular season leading to a postseason. Now, that would be the big end of the big revolution. So I don't know that happens, but for the ensuing years, it's just going to be weird. It's going to be weird. We're going to lose some rivalries. We're going to have some real oddities in terms of conference games being played. It might be interesting. It might not. It's a lot of wait and see for me, because some of this stuff on paper looks insane, even though it's rationally defensible.
Right.
So I wish I had a better crystal ball to say where this is going. But even as much as I have about the history of this sport, we're really in a lot of uncharted water right now. So it's upcoming decisions are going to determine what happens after that.
Yeah, and you've been on top of it. I mean, a lot of the things that you were saying were going to happen leading into last college football season have already happened in a way much quicker than anticipated. I mean, on the one hand, as a college football fan, the idea of UCLA playing Wisconsin in the snow, the idea of USC versus Ohio State, Alabama, Oklahoma, these are fun ideas. On the other hand, it seems a lot like a money grab. And I don't know that the idea of a couple of super conferences that stand alone by themselves, and then all the mid-major teams, so to speak, kind of being left out for good. I'm not sure that that's something that is as enticing to me as what we already have now.
Yeah, that's a common feeling. The problem is these schools need the money. So it's not so much a money grab as it is a money necessity.
It does seem like it's going to take away from college football in a lot of ways, even though we'll have some key matchups that are fun.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's what I mean about the weirdness of it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of wait and see. All those matchups you talked about are intriguing. Someone made the point, I can't remember who it was, but they said a lot of that novelty sells for a season or two, like the home and home. But once these schools have played each other at their ballparks, it's no longer a novelty, and now it's become routine. And then the strangeness of the routine starts to stand out.
Right.
So UCLA and USC, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, the Big Ten and the Pac-12, Pac-10, Pac-8, Pac-5, however far back you want to go, even to the PCC, which is the forerunner of the Pac-12 today. They're actually separate leagues. These guys have paired up many times across the decades, the Big Ten and the flagship Pacific Conference. So
really?
Many times they've separated themselves from college football as a whole and kind of stood aloof. If you spend much time around college football, you'll hear people talk about Big Ten arrogance and Pac-12 snobbery, and sometimes what they're talking about is that very thing. The Big Ten and the Pac-12, they stood apart. They had the Rose Bowl. It was the highest paid bowl game by far. They didn't share it with the rest of college football when college football was signing TV deals and trying to build the Bowl Coalition and the Bowl Alliance. The Big Ten and Pac-12 said, no thanks, we'll just keep the Rose Bowl. You can play for your national titles. We'll just play for conference titles and Rose Bowl titles. And, whatever happens, happens. So USC and UCLA have a ton of history with the Big Ten, from regular season games to Rose Bowl games to academic affinity to college athletics outlook affinity. So from a cultural standpoint, USC and UCLA is not a strange fit in the Big Ten. What is weird is the 2,000 miles to the Midwest,
right,
and another 1,000 to the East Coast, which the Big Ten is in too. So that's the weirdness. The SEC adding Oklahoma and Texas, it's actually, the SEC is just a big super regional conference now. If you look at the SEC on a map, geographically and institutionally, philosophically, it actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I didn't know that about the history of the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. I appreciate you sharing that. It kind of feels to me like UCLA and USC moving to the Big Ten was a direct response to Oklahoma and Texas joining the SEC. Do you see that, or do you see it differently?
Yeah, it was definitely a response. It's a response. It's a power game in certain ways. It's an arms race in certain ways. The Big Ten didn't feel like they could just stand pat and let the SEC dominate. Not just college football's postseason, but then dominate the world of media rights as well.
Right.
So it was a response. Absolutely, but there are strong undercurrents in college football pulling the whole sport that direction. So it wasn't just a response from the Big Ten for those reasons. The Big Ten had been looking to do these kind of things for a long time. You can go back. I mean, you could go back to Penn State if you wanted, when the Big Ten had a Penn State in 90, and then they joined in 93, and you can look at Rutgers and Maryland. People did not understand the Rutgers-Maryland move, but I'll tell you what, Rutgers and Maryland are both looking very smart.
Yeah.
The people running their institutions clearly saw what was coming in those, already going on, 8 years ago now, coming up on a decade. So, you're right about that. It is. These leagues are fighting. That's the thing about college football. College football fights against itself. The NFL combines its powers and gets as much as it can for everyone. College football fights itself, which is a major difference between the two sports.
Very well said, Mark. I think there's a lot of validity to that. And what do you make of the Big 12 with conference realignment? Are they done as one of the major conferences?
No, I don't think so. They're doing pretty well. I don't know how consistently their high end opportunities, final outcomes are going to be in terms of winning it all. They could put together good enough teams. The Big 12 is in a good spot in the country for football. There are a lot of athletes in the area. They're not going to get first pick, but there's still a lot of athletes. They have some good brands in there. They cover a lot of territory. And particularly for guys who are not going to be, not the 5-star, not the 4-star, a lot of these guys in that area are going to want to stay closer to home. College kids generally do. And they're going to get an opportunity to get a lot of players. So, you look at the teams in Texas, you look at the teams with some pretty good history in the Great Plains, not the best. Oklahoma obviously dominates the Great Plains and always has, but there's some pretty good. Oklahoma State can jump up some years. Kansas State has punched out of its class for a long time. The Big 12 is not dead. Definitely not dead, but they have important moves to make going forward to solidify their standing in the sport.
Do you think that the Big 12 will try to make a raid on the Pac-12 and add teams from that conference?
I think they already have tried, and I think they've been turned down. It may have even been the other way, the Pac-12 deciding if they were going to invite Big 12 schools. The numbers are interesting to look at. The Pac-12 universities without UCLA and USC, which have always been in the early days it was Stanford and Cal, but that was way, way back. USC and UCLA have really been the core of that league for a long time. But, Washington, Oregon, and North are still strong. Stanford is still pretty strong. Cal's still a great brand. But you look at the universities in the Pac-12 and the markets that they're in, the Utah's former AD was just quoted just the other day, I think by John Wilner, and he said a Pac-12 team moving to the Big 12 does not move the needle even close enough to make the move worthwhile. So those two leagues have a standout going on. The Pac-12 is going to have to do something to replace that Los Angeles market, but the Pac-12 is stronger than I think people believe. The Pac-12, as often is the case, is a much more complicated story than other leagues because of how they do their business. But if the Pac-12 refocuses on football, as they've been known to do time to time over the decades, they can still be a strong football league.
And Mark, where does NIL fit into the greater landscape of college football moving forward? In my neck of the woods on talk radio, what I hear all the time is griping and complaining about how the disparity between college football and the NFL is shrinking, that we're having basically college football become a minor league for the NFL. My take is that it's already been that for a long time. I certainly think that college athletes deserve to make money off of their own name and their likeness. But I do see a disparity in how the rules are set state to state. I do wish that there was a way for college football to step in and say, we're all going to play on by the same rules and on the same playing field. How do you see NIL fitting into college football moving forward?
Major addition to college athletics and college football. It was even a few years ago unthinkable that the NCAA would allow this to happen and still be in charge of college football. Unfortunately, the NCAA held on to that mindset to the bitter end, and arguing as recently as, was it 20 months ago, less than 2 years ago, in the Alston case, that amateurism was what the NCAA said it is because the NCAA said that's what amateurism is. I mean, it was the most tautological argument you could possibly make, and they were still trying it in front of the Supreme Court. They were doing that in the 1950s, the 60s, the 70s. That was their same amateurism argument. It was amazing to hear it in the 2020s, and they got fried. I think it was a 9-0 decision. So the NCAA just got absolutely smoked. This NIL transition did not have to be like this. It's absolutely true. The players deserve access to the open market. Even if they hadn't earned it, even if they had not put the amount of effort they had into their athletic development, they still had a right to it, just as citizens of this country and our free market economy and our opportunity to use your talents for what they're worth on the open market. So it's an excellent thing that it has happened, but because of the way the NCAA handled it, it's a cliched phrase, but it is Wild West-esque in terms of there are purported laws and rules and regulations, but there's nobody there to enforce them. There's no sheriff in town. So this community in college football particularly is creating their own set of rules and operating as they see fit in their sport. So NIL is going to be a great thing, but it needs to get, as you alluded to, it needs to be brought under control. It needs to have clear regulations everywhere, and there needs to be someone to enforce the regulations that are put on the books. Until that happens, the doomsday scenario, and you can kind of see it playing out right now, is that these crazy boosters get control of college football.
Right.
We don't want that. People may think they want that because their school has the best boosters, and maybe those few schools do. But we really don't want that insanity. The whole point of like the NFL collectivizing its product and getting their antitrust exemptions is so a New York team can't buy all of Green Bay's players every year, because that's no fun. It's not good for competitive balance. It's not good for your TV product. It's not good for business. So college football needs to be looking that direction, but also remembering it is college football. You mentioned the professional stuff. We don't want a NFL light. We want college football the best it can be. So there's a lot of work to be done on that front.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It almost seems like college football needs its own commissioner, its own CEO at this point, because the rules do need to be evenly enforced, and the NCAA has shown that they're incapable of doing that. Already this offseason you had Nick Saban make comments that he's now walked back at least a tad, saying that Texas A&M has bought their entire signing class. And of course, a quarterback at Alabama or USC or Oklahoma is going to have more opportunities than a quarterback at Kent State or University of Miami, Ohio. That's just par for the course. But there has to be some level of equality or equity between at least state to state. And right now, the rules are different. They're set by the state governments in every state, and so they're different from place to place. I think that what you're saying is dead on.
Right. You don't want to get in a place where these states are vying with each other for who's going to be more permissive in terms of what you can do.
Yeah.
That's just a bad road to go down. So, college athletics have a very mixed record of getting things right and getting things wrong. I hope the smartest people, the Greg Sankeys of the world, the people kind of behind the curtain in the Big Ten, not the Kevin Warren's, not in charge or not even a commissioner, but he hasn't been in college athletics for very long. There are the Barry Alvarez and several other people there. You hope these people are sitting center table at these meetings and letting people know what needs to be done. There are people who understand this game. The hope is whoever's in charge of it, whether it's the NCAA going forward or a new kind of organization, that they understand that and they do what's best for the game.
Very well said. Well, Mark, I sent you our In the Shed with Wes Anderson top 25 preseason poll, and obviously anytime that you're projecting preseason standings, it can be pretty difficult. So basically what I do is I actually go through every single college football team, and I take about 2 weeks to look at their roster, look at their recruiting class, look at who they have coming back, look at their coaching staff, and to try to do the best job that I can of putting together who I think will be the top 25 teams entering the season, not based on what they did last year, not based on their brand, not based on their conference, but based on who's going to perform the best. Last year we got some things right. We had Cincinnati ranked number 2 overall to start the year. We had Georgia ranked number 1 pretty early in the season. We had Kentucky winning double-digit games, Texas A&M beating Alabama. But we also whiffed on quite a bit as well. I had Texas A&M winning the SEC West. I had both Indiana and Washington ranked very highly. I think I had Washington in the top 10 and Indiana ranked 14th. And I had Clemson ranked as the number 1 team overall, so definitely some hits there, but some misses as well. I sent you our top 25 poll, and just to run it down quickly for the listeners, our top 10 looked like this: Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Baylor, NC State, Oklahoma State, Houston at 7, Clemson 8, Notre Dame 9, and Kentucky 10th overall. And then I had Oregon 11th, Texas A&M, Michigan, USC, Pittsburgh, Utah, Wake Forest, Oklahoma 18th, Cincinnati 19th, Mississippi State 20th, BYU 21st, Tennessee 22, Miami 23rd, Coastal Carolina 24th, and Arkansas 25th. You've had a chance to see these rankings. It's time for you to eviscerate me. You are the expert and the historian. What do you like about our rankings? What did I get completely wrong?
Well, listen, first of all, I have one question. Is the H left off of Pittsburgh, or is that a tip of the cap to Pittsburgh Landing over in Tennessee?
I wish it were. That, my friend, is a typo.
Okay. I thought it might have been a little tip of the cap, and I like that. But,
I wish I could take credit for it.
I'll never eviscerate someone's preseason poll unless they are picking, like, Akron to win the national title because, outside of a few top teams, particularly in this environment, these preseason polls frequently are wildly off. And not only that, and I'm not talking about your poll with this particular point, but I'm talking about polls that people look at nationally. They can actually have sinister effects on really good football team seasons. A really good team that starts 18th or 19th and goes 11 or 12-0, and they never get higher than 11th or 10th or 14th or 9th in the polls, whatever it might be, and they never sniff the real opportunity to play for a big prize. There have been I can think of 2 Utah teams right off the bat, one in the Mountain West, and I believe one when they were in the Pac-12, maybe just before. No, they were still in the Mountain West. Two Utah teams that really deserved a shot at the top of the sport, and they never got the opportunity. They got to play in BCS games. One just absolutely destroyed the Big East champion Pittsburgh. That was Urban Meyer's last team, the Fiesta Bowl. And then Kyle Whittingham, 2008, 2009 Sugar Bowl, just beat up on Nick Saban Alabama team. It wasn't a close game.
I loved it.
That's kind of Utah deserved better, which is part of the reason they were so thrilled to be in the Pac-12, and now that's falling apart on them. But I'll give you some credit rather than eviscerating you here. I think the NC State, Oklahoma State, Baylor. I said that the wrong order. Baylor 4, NC State 5, Okie State 6. Very interesting. That's a bold preseason pick. I kind of like that because if you're doing a preseason poll, why not?
Why not? Why not swing for the fences?
Exactly. Baylor. I think Baylor has lost some key parts that they're going to need. NC State has a nice quarterback. They've got good lines, good team. Okie State with Mike Gundy, always dangerous. So I like those. Clemson at 8. This will be a big year for Clemson in Dabo because they had a quote-unquote bad year last year. What did they finish last year, 10-3? That was a bad year for those guys, and it was bad because they couldn't get their offense going, and they got really poor quarterback play. Assuming their quarterback play gets a little better, Clemson to me is they're another title contender team, particularly with the defense and most particularly with the defensive line. I think they have a chance to just annihilate opposing offenses, particularly in the ACC. They're going to get Notre Dame is going to be a test. They have a few games that are going to be tough, but Clemson, I think, is likely a major playoff contender. And at number 8, they still could be.
Right.
Look at your Kentucky. You're high on Kentucky this year.
I am, and I have to be completely honest. The 3 teams that I root for in college football are the Auburn Tigers, the Kentucky Wildcats, and the Colorado Buffs. So what that typically means is that when it comes to football, you normally, as an Auburn fan, you expect the worst and hope for the best. As a Kentucky fan, I'm definitely looking through some big blue glasses this year. I think they're going to have a very good defense. I think it'll be one of the best 3 or 4 defenses in the conference. I'm expecting big things out of Will Levis. Chris Rodriguez is a terrific running back for Kentucky. The thing that worries me about the Wildcats, and they've been an ascending team in the SEC East, what Mark Stoops has done at Kentucky is just perennially underrated. But what scares me about their team is that they lost their offensive coordinator who had really transformed their offense last year. He put in a lot of NFL route trees for their receivers. He kind of updated things. And that's really what allowed Will Levis and company to set the numbers that they did. So that does worry me some for Kentucky. But I expect big things from them. I kind of am getting a lot of flack for the fact that I don't have a few teams in my top 25. Mainly, I'm hearing a lot from Wisconsin Badger fans and Michigan State fans. So what do you think about my leaving them out?
Yeah, I would say Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State are all going to be top 25 teams.
Right.
Wisconsin looks like the favorite in the West this year. It's going to be, I think, just one of those bloody battles to the death with the University of Iowa, and it's going to depend on who gets the better quarterback play. Iowa's had abysmal quarterback play in the last few seasons, and a lot of people have blamed Kirk Ferentz's son, who's the offensive coordinator, for the issues, and there have been offensive issues, but really, your Kentucky team last year, I'm guessing you watched the Citrus Bowl?
I did.
So that wasn't a problem with the offensive coordinator in the Citrus Bowl. That was a problem with the quarterback. If you go back and watch that film, Iowa, particularly in the fourth quarter, the second half and then the fourth quarter, had receivers running wide open. And he just missed throws all over the place. So that was a very close game. Minnesota has a chance. I don't have a lot of faith in Minnesota. They may sneak into the top 25. Michigan State is interesting. I'll tell you what, Mel Tucker, we talked about Colorado. By the way, I don't know if you saw, I've been posting some Buff stuff lately. I had on a Colorado Buffaloes hat today.
I have, yeah.
They are one of my sneaky cool universities. They always have been. I'm hoping to have Darian Hagan on my chat show in the near future.
Very cool.
To talk some Bill McCartney days. I just talked to Rick Neuheisel. We got into it about Bill McCartney when the Buffs were truly a powerhouse. He was their head coach.
Yeah.
Mel Tucker, Michigan State, came over from Colorado. He was doing good things at Colorado. I want to see if Tucker can sustain this year over year.
Right.
20 was a bad start for him, but 20 was just a weird year. 21, Michigan State was excellent, but they had some great weapons on that team.
They did.
He's recruiting well. He appears to be an excellent coach. I think this year is going to say it's not a make or break here by any stretch of the imagination, but I think this year is going to be interesting to see how he sustains it coming off of last season. So Wisconsin, Michigan State, Iowa, I think those three likely end up in the top 25 somewhere and are going to have tough football teams for sure. Another Big Ten team I think you might be a little low on is Michigan.
Okay.
Michigan brings a lot back and a lot of depth. And particularly on the offensive side, I think they're going to be really good. Their offensive line is excellent. Michigan, as a general rule, Michigan has tough defenses, and certain years they have extremely tough defenses. So that's a little bit of a question mark, but I think Michigan, it's going to come down in the East to Ohio State and Michigan. I think Michigan is probably a playoff contender until proven otherwise. And at 13, they could be. So I don't think you have them like wildly out of place, but I think Michigan is probably really pushing up into the top 10, especially over a team like Oregon. Oregon could be good this year. Like you have Oregon at 11 for everybody who's listening to this, which is 2 spots ahead of Michigan. To me, Oregon has a lot of question marks with the new coaching staff,
right,
with Auburn legend Bo Nix coming in to play quarterback.
Hey, Bo Nix is focused, he's having fun, and he's a dark horse for the Heisman. That's what we say around here.
That's right. Every year, so this might be the year.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah, Oregon, I had a lot of trouble with Oregon placing them. They do have a lot of question marks. starting with a first-year head coach. Will their defense stand up to the test of the Pac-12 schedule? How will they fare in their first game against Georgia? That's almost assuredly a loss starting off the season. And with the Big Ten, I considered putting Michigan in the top 10, and I think they'll have a very good team. I love their offensive line. I don't think they'll struggle offensively, but they do have to replace a lot on defense. I believe they swap out their defensive coordinator this offseason. So I really have questions. My questions from Michigan come from defense, and full disclosure, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Michigan State. So those three teams are 26, 27, and 28th for me. I have Michigan State as the first team out of the top 25, followed by Wisconsin and Iowa. For a lot of the same reasons you listed, Mark. Michigan State, I think Mel Tucker is a very good coach, but he's only had one very good season. Was that a one-off, or are they going to be able to show up? I kind of think that they might have a disappointing year this year. I think that Wisconsin and Iowa and Michigan and Ohio State will prove to be better teams, possibly even Minnesota. Wisconsin and Iowa, I do believe, will probably be top 25 teams by the time this thing is over. But like you said, I have questions about their quarterback play. Last year, I left Wisconsin out of my preseason top 25, and I caught so much flack for it. In the first few weeks of the season, Wisconsin had not yet discovered the forward pass, and I looked like a genius. They put things together, and Wisconsin is always going to be able to run the ball. They're always going to play defense. They're always going to be well coached. I just don't know that their quarterback play will be heads and shoulders better this season than it was last year. And same thing for Iowa. Kirk Ferentz is a phenomenal football coach. They're going to play defense. They're going to get after you. They're going to be physical. But are they going to be able to hit those wide open receivers? That is what I'm unsure about when it comes to Big Ten football. And I think that Ohio State is by far the class of the Big Ten again this season.
Yeah, that's fair. And by the way, yeah, you're absolutely right. Jesse Minter is the Wolverines DC, and he's the third new DC in 3 years, and Michigan is returning 4 starters on defense. Now, they have good depth, but replacing 7 and a new D coordinator, even with his NFL experience, is definitely a question mark. But Ohio State's defense also is a question mark. They have their new coordinator, Jim Knowles, in there. He's a great coordinator, but he's had one off season.
Right.
A lot of talent to work with, but one season to install the culture he wants to install and do the things he wants to do. Now, depending on how good Ohio State's offense is, and it's probably going to be absolutely lethal. Ohio State, they definitely don't need an absolutely elite defense. If they get an above-average, opportunistic defense, it may easily be all they'll need until the last, Big Ten championship, maybe college football playoff. Definitely you're going to need to be able to do some things defensively there, but I would tend to agree with you that Ohio State appears to be the grade 1 stakes favorite for the Big Ten this year. I mean, you look at Ohio State, you can argue they have 3 Heisman Trophy candidates on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, 3 legitimate ones. The receiver in Jigba might be the most long shot because receivers don't often win it.
Right.
But you look at their quarterback and running back, and it's like, usually a really great offense needs like a set of triplets, right? You need a quarterback, a running back, and a wideout, and then everybody else fills in secondary, tertiary roles. Well, Ohio State definitely has that. So, yeah, I think, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, probably Clemson, maybe a few others. Those are probably the class of college football again this year.
Yeah, and I agree with you on your take on Clemson. I think that their defensive line has potential to be the best defensive line they've had over with Dabo Swinney, which would be an incredible thing. But do they have a quarterback? He looked so good in his starts as a backup when he was a spot starter for the Tigers. Last season, he was not very consistent, not very good. What's going to happen there? What do you make, Mark, of my absolute insanity of putting Houston as a top 10 football team?
Yeah, I give you interesting points credit on that, but I also, I don't know if crazy points balances out the other way or if it enhances the score, if it's just all in. I think that's probably pretty wild. They're going to have a good offense, and they have a good team. But when I look at them coming out of the AAC, and I'm trying to think of their schedule and who they got, but I think Cincinnati, UCF, Houston are clearly a cut above in the AAC.
Yeah.
Depending on, I was actually going to look at this. Do you have UCF ranked?
I have UCF 39th.
39th. Okay. Cincinnati, I think, probably drops back just slightly this year. They lost a lot. I just don't think they're going to do it 2 years in a row. So put UCF and Houston 1A, Cincinnati 1B, or 2 if you want. I think UCF could win the AAC. I really do. So if Houston is that high in your rankings, I think UCF has to be somewhere nearby. And I don't think UCF is good enough to be a top 7 team. So I look at Houston. I think Houston has a good chance to be a top 25 team and a good chance to probably be a maybe top 15 team. I don't think Houston is going to be a top 10 team, even as interesting as Hogo is and, as good as his teams are at scoring points. And I think Houston has a little bit of a defense this year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they have a very good defensive line returning. So I put them at 7th because in looking at their schedule, I have them going undefeated this year. So this is a little bit of a preemptive strike on my behalf. Go ahead and put them up there where they may finish if they were to go undefeated. I just think that Cincinnati will take a couple steps back. They lost too many NFL bodies. UCF is interesting. Being an Auburn fan, I root for Gus Malzahn. I think that he's an above-average college football coach and a good man. I hope that he runs the table. I think that their defense and their talent level is still a year or two behind the other top-tier teams in their conference, and they're catching up quickly. I mean, they've already signed, I think, 4 4-star players in the last couple weeks for next year, so they're catching up quickly. I mean, that people don't know this, but UCF has the highest enrollment of any college in Florida. It's in a great place. They're moving to the Big 12. I mean, the future is unlimited for Central Florida football, but I just feel like they're on the outside looking in when it comes to the top 25. They may wind up a top 25 team as the season goes on. I just don't have them there yet. Mark, what do you think about USC? I have them 14th overall. They were another team that had a lot of trouble figuring out where to put them. Really, them and Oregon, I kind of was deciding between the two of those at 11 and 14, and I went with Oregon at 11 and USC at 14. I love all the transfers that they got this offseason. Obviously, USC teams always are loaded with talent. I love the new hire and coaching staff as a whole. What do you see for them this year?
Yeah, okay. Before I jump to USC, I'm looking at your Houston prediction and Houston schedule, and you might be a genius for that because that schedule, if they could really blow out a lot of that schedule and come in with a really kind of trumped up undefeated record. I see they missed both UCF and Cincinnati.
Yep.
So that's a dream schedule. Houston with that schedule, they're going to have to really impress because of the quality of the opponents there. But you might be closer on Houston than I'm giving you credit for.
Could I clip the part where you said I might be a genius and just put that into my show every week?
Please do. Whatever's going to help you grow this audience in India, I'm all for.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm looking at USC. USC's interesting. Obviously, the coaching hire is the more that kind of settles into being fact, the wilder kind of a moment that seems to be in college football history, particularly because of where USC got him from. Coaches don't generally leave Oklahoma.
Right.
And they generally don't leave in the fashion that he did. And there's a lot of weird kind of – it's shady, to be frank, to me, in terms of the timeline of how this all went down. I understand some of the Sooner fans upset with a guy who was handed that program leaving in the fashion he did. It was if the way Bob Stoops gave him the program was all class, I would say the way he left was on the other side of that.
Yeah.
But it's a business, and the coaches at the coaching end are professionals. I think we need to separate a little bit coaches from players. Those are two different tiers of jobs, with it always being clear that players, we talked about before, deserve their rights in the open market, deserve to be compensated for their efforts, etc. So I get coaches jumping around like this. He makes USC immediately nationally compelling again. And the guys he got from Oklahoma through the transfer portal for the offense, and knowing what we know about how effective his offenses are at scoring points, I think it's likely with Caleb Williams pulling the trigger back there that USC is almost immediately one of the scariest offenses in the conference, if not nationally, with that talent level. What we're waiting to see with USC is on the defensive side. And
right.
If we're looking at Pac-12 teams of recent vintage, I think one of the things that people need to look at when they understand the SEC's, what makes the SEC kind of unique and elite is they have a lot of defensive line bodies in SEC country, and they can build a lot of depth up front. And football, no matter what happens in football, if you can manhandle people at the line of scrimmage, you're going to have a great opportunity to win. The Pac-12 teams have had difficulty outside of Utah some years, Oregon some years, Washington some years, have had difficulty building that kind of big depth on the defensive lines. And USC's defense has been suspect lately as is. So if you listen to Oklahoma people who you got to take it with a grain of salt because they're upset that Lincoln Riley left, but they were, before he left, they were not happy with the way Oklahoma was playing defense under Lincoln Riley. It was different than what they're used to. Oklahoma had always been a physical defense. So if he exports that to the Pac-12 and USC stays playing that soft defense, I'll tell you what, Utah will manhandle USC this year if that's the case. Utah is a big physical team. They're nasty. They're very much like Iowa in the Big Ten in terms of you either stand up to them or they will bully you all day. So, when I look at USC from that point of view, offensively, fascinating, defensively, that's where the real question is are they going to be able to stand up defensively?
Yeah, and I think that Lincoln Riley is I didn't see that coming at all. For him to leave a place like Oklahoma to wind up at USC, I mean, it just blew my mind, as it did most folks in the sporting world. And I think that he's an offensive mastermind. I think that Caleb Williams will be very good in the Pac-12 this season. What do you make, this last question about top 25, we'll move on, but what do you make of the fact that I have both Oregon and USC above a team like Utah in my top 25 rankings out of the Pac-12?
I think Utah, until proven otherwise, has to be ahead of Oregon at this point.
I think
based on what they have,
yeah,
based on what they've done, based on the continuity in that program, you basically know what you're going to get with Utah. And Utah also just has some interesting pieces. I mean, their quarterback play, as you know, is so crucial in college football. It can just make you so much better. And Utah and Cameron Rising has a really effective quarterback. He's got some swagger and some playmaking ability. The guy makes stuff happen. So if he stays healthy, you know what you got on the defensive side with Utah. Utah is bringing back 6 defensive starters. They're bringing back 8 on offense. USC, I was just looking, USC brings back 3 guys on defense.
Wow.
3 guys. So they're replacing 8 with a new DC, new coach, etc. I think Utah has to be ahead of Oregon, has to be ahead of USC. I see USC's 2 spots in front of them. I think Utah is the pride of the Pac-12 until dethroned. I will say this, though. We've already established I went to school at UCLA. UCLA is the good money long shot horse in the South.
Yeah.
UCLA has some talented people, particularly on offense. Once again, just like USC, UCLA, the question is going to be, can they play defense for the first time in years?
Yeah.
If they play a little bit of defense, UCLA can score with anybody. They got a quarterback who's in his 8th or 9th year, 10th season possibly, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who's people seen him play. When he's going, man, he's electric.
Very talented quarterback.
you can watch him hurdle a man standing tall against USC on the way to 60 points to beating the Trojans last year. So Utah is the cream. I think UCLA, USC, I actually think they're the number 2 teams who are going to battle it out with an opportunity to upset Utah in the South. But I think Utah is the pride of the pack this year.
Yeah, and I think that's completely fair. I think that's valid. In my first, I made a couple of drafts. In my first draft of my top 25, I actually had Utah at number 9 overall in the country. And as I revised, I slid them down. I think their quarterback, Rising, has an opportunity to be the most consistent player at the quarterback position between Utah, USC, and Oregon. I think that the top level, I think that both Bo Nix at Oregon and Caleb Williams at USC can reach a level that maybe Cameron Rising cannot, but there's no guarantee that they will. Utah is by far the best defense. I think is the more physical team. They're very well coached. They just slid down. As I wrote the teams out, they kind of moved down and down. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I feel like the Pac-12 has gotten better as a whole during the offseason, and because of that, I just felt like with Utah being the hunted rather than the hunter, they might take a couple of lumps this year that they did not in years past, and that's kind of why I have them at 16. Let's do this, Mark. Let's move on to my SEC East predictions, and
Sure.
you can continue to educate me there. Because we're about to go deep. We're about to go deep, my friend. I have done something that there's no coming back from, and that's okay because this is all preseason. It's fun to prognosticate and to guess, and that's all that I'm doing, just like anyone on FS1 or ESPN. But this is how I predicted things to wind up in the SEC East. I had Kentucky. Yes, the Kentucky Wildcats in football, not basketball, winning the SEC East. I had Georgia 2nd, Tennessee 3rd, South Carolina 4th, Florida 5th, Missouri 6th, and Vanderbilt. They're just going to struggle. How crazy am I for putting Kentucky at 1? Do you think that anybody in the SEC East has a chance to beat Georgia?
Yeah, they definitely do have a chance to beat Georgia, especially coming off a national title season. I just want to say about Vanderbilt quickly, though. It was Clark Lee. It was their head coach, right, who said they were going to be number 1 within
He did.
a few years. Yeah, so don't sleep on Vandy. That starts this year.
Hey, look, he's a tough guy. If we're picking SEC East coaches in a fight that you don't want to see in the dark alley, he's pretty high on that list. Unfortunately, his defensive and offensive lines don't match that tenacity.
So, yeah, your Kentucky pick. Georgia does have a chance to lose. Coming off a national title, there's always an opportunity for a letdown game. There's always an opportunity for that in college football, period.
True.
It's anybody who has spent honestly, I would say if you watch college football for one season, the thing that may impress you the most or leave the most lasting memory is how many insane upsets happened over the course of a season. Just superior teams losing to inferior teams, sometimes on improbable final drives, other times just winning the game. Just like another team showed up for the favored side and the underdog side played out of their minds and an upset happened. So I think winning a championship coming back that next year is the first real test of a champion. Can you do it again? Now, the thing Georgia has going for it that all great programs that have sustained success have is they lose a wave of guys to the next level of graduation, but they replace it with another wave of guys who have practiced against those starters for the last year or two,
Right.
have watched those starters go out and win all these big games. They've had that culture, that attitude, that mindset instilled into them. And when they take the field, there's not a lot of drop-off. So Georgia, based on past performance results, like you're reading a daily racing form over the last 3 to 4 to 5 years, looks like a team that just replaces with players who are just as good, if not better. With that in mind, I think Kentucky winning the East is improbable. Not impossible, but improbable. I love Mark Stoops. He comes from Hayden Fry, the University of Iowa. He's a fundamentally sound coach. He's actually a guy, and I hate to do this to you, Wes, but when Kirk Ferentz retired, I think Iowa goes after Mark Stoops, and I think they have a fair shot at landing him.
Wow. Yeah, you're hurting my feelings, Mark.
Yeah, I didn't mean to do that. It was hard for me to say that out loud, but I just felt like truth should win out here.
I've as it should. I've never thought about that, but now I'm kind of sad. Yeah.
Well, there's no guarantee they get him, but I think without doubt they have a conversation.
So Kentucky winning the SEC East, very improbable, but you're saying there's a chance.
I'm saying there's a chance, man.
So I think that the reason why I picked them to win, in looking at their schedule, it sets up pretty nicely for them. They have a couple of key games early. They play Florida and Ole Miss, I think both in like the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. Those are pivotal games. If Kentucky loses one or even both of those games, they might wind up 8-4 and having a disappointing season, which the fact that 8-4 would possibly be a disappointing season for Kentucky football is just unfathomable. But if they win both of those games, I think they have a realistic shot to go into a home game at Kroger Field against Georgia as an undefeated football team. And if they are undefeated in the SEC East, they'll be a top 15 team at least. That crowd is a very underrated crowd at their stadium. Not one of the bigger stadiums in the SEC, but they get loud. Georgia, I think that all the talk about their defense taking such a big step back is overblown. Just like you said, they are loaded with talent. They may not have a historically good defense this year, but they will have a very, very good defense again. And I think that Stetson Bennett is a very good college quarterback. The fact that that's still debated every day on talk radio is absurd to me after he performed better than Bryce Young in the fourth quarter of the national championship game. But I picked Kentucky to lose one game, and that's to Tennessee. And then I predicted Georgia to lose one game to Kentucky, and for Kentucky to have the tiebreaker. I don't think that if they go to the SEC championship that they'll win, but if they can get to a home game as an undefeated team against Georgia, with Will Levis returning, with Chris Rodriguez, with a very good defense, with a solid offensive line, I just think that they have a puncher's chance. And when it comes to preseason football, the name of the game is trying to predict what can't be seen. And that's what I'm trying to do, because Kentucky as the SEC East champion, that's something that just can't be seen for very many people. I may look like a crazy person. They may go 7-5, 8-4, but that's the risk you take when you do these things.
Yeah, it's difficult to see, but it's a beautiful dream, my friend. And, why not dream like that, particularly in August? I'm looking at their schedule. You make a lot of fair points, and a lot of this could come to fruition. That game at Ole Miss is going to be tough. South Carolina, they get at home. I'm looking at Tennessee. It looks like the visitor has won the last 3 in that series. So at Tennessee, that appears to bode well at the moment. I'll tell you what, if they get Georgia November 19th and they're undefeated, that will be the ultimate gauntlet thrown down, because one thing you'll notice amongst championship teams is generally it builds over several years, and one of the things that builds is a capacity for staying calm and playing well in big games. John Wooden at UCLA, he had his pyramid of success, and at the very top of his pyramid, the top block was competitive greatness. And what he said that is being at your best when the moment called for it. So essentially, all your training, everything you've done, every game you've played in, you need to have the maximum output of all those skills in the biggest moment. And the team that does that to a greater extent will win. So Kentucky will need to have the highest level of competitive greatness against Georgia. If they both come in undefeated, you can be pretty sure Georgia is going to be at or near their peak because they're used to playing in those games.
Right.
But as a college football fan, I would love to see that happen. Undefeated Kentucky, Georgia in November. That would be must-see viewing. So, here's hoping it happens. I'd love to watch that game.
It'll be so much fun, and I'll make sure that I'm not attending any weddings that weekend if it does occur. So far, I may be a genius. I may be insane. I have Houston in the top 10 and Kentucky winning the SEC East. In the West, things look a little bit more conventional in my take. I have Alabama winning the SEC West. I have Texas A&M finishing second, Auburn finishing third, Arkansas fourth, Ole Miss fifth, Mississippi State sixth, and LSU seventh. What sticks out to you about the SEC West and my predictions there?
Seeing LSU at the bottom is always strange. They're kind of rebuilding everything. Major roster turnover, new coaching staff, totally new culture coming down from Notre Dame. Outside looking in, it looks like exactly what a program like LSU needs.
Yeah.
Which is just a really structured, regimented head coach who knows exactly who he is in the world and what he wants to do. I don't think Brian Kelly gets lost down in Baton Rouge. I think he's Brian Kelly wherever he goes. So depending on how long Brian Kelly, I don't know if there is really a big crowd out there who thinks he's not much of a coach or who really believes that. Brian Kelly is a top-tier head coach, depending on the size of that tier. If it's top 2, no, he's not. If it's top 5, maybe. If it's top 10, he's definitely a top 10 college head coach. The thing I like to say about Brian Kelly is as you drop down from the very top-level Division I football, you go 1AA or FCS, D2, D3. As you get down into D2, D3, the talent levels are a lot more equalized across the sport.
Right.
Some schools have more, but as a general rule, there aren't schools that are just absolutely overloaded with the best players in the country where they can substitute 2 to 3 deep. At the Division II level, Brian Kelly, I believe, in his last 2 years, his teams went like 28-1 and won back-to-back national titles.
Wow.
He took that to Division I. He's been great. He was great. Arguably could have played for a national title at Cincinnati. They're another one of those teams who kind of got screwed by the polls. He's been there with Notre Dame. They've fallen just short. So I think at LSU, it's just a matter of how long does it take him to rebuild that thing. They may finish 7th this year just based on they're not quite ready to go year one. Let me ask you a question about what's the feeling at Auburn right now with Brian Harsin and what's going on there? There's been a lot of weird noise from the plains about Brian Harsin.
Yeah, it's business as usual for Auburn. Just insanity. There was a coup in the offseason by boosters and high-level people at Auburn that were didn't like the hire in the first place, bringing somebody with no SEC experience. Didn't feel like he was a good cultural fit. Lost 18 players to the transfer portal at season's end. Lost the last 5 games of the year, including the Birmingham Bowl to Houston, which I was at. Part of my reason for having Houston a top 10 team and seeing what they have returning. Auburn doesn't have a quarterback that we are sure is very good at a SEC level. They have an offensive line that's very experienced, but so far that experience has been bad. And it's a situation where they have a head football coach that I believe is a good football coach, but that if he doesn't at least go 7-5 and upset a couple teams, very well may be out of a job this year. The fact that they did try to get him out and force him out in the offseason has actually had a galvanizing effect on the fan base as a whole. I think that the average run-of-the-mill Auburn football fan is very much in Brian Harsin's corner now and wants him to do well at Auburn, wants him to be the guy. But the tail of the tape is going to be on the field this year for Auburn. I don't think that TJ Finley, the transfer from LSU that played at Auburn last year, I don't think that he is anything more than an average SEC quarterback. Zach Calzada coming in from Texas A&M appears to be the guy probably. He had a great game against Alabama last year but was up and down before and after that. The guy that I would love to see on the field for Auburn is the transfer out of Oregon, Robbie Ashford. He's an Alabama kid. He grew up in Alabama, was a terrific high school quarterback. I'm not sure that he's ready to start. I don't think that he'll get the nod week 1, but long-term he might be a player there. It's going to be an interesting season. The media picked Auburn to finish last in the SEC West. Auburn's a lot more talented than that. They have the talent to do a lot better than 7th overall. It's just a matter of buy-in. It's a matter of how good will their quarterback play be for them this season.
Yeah, it's interesting with Brian Harsin. He's a little bit of a hard ass.
Yeah, for sure.
He's just one of those kind of coaches. Harsin is the one who said take the stairs, not the elevator, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I get that. I see looking from the outside in when you think like, oh, geez, this guy, But depending on how he enforced that, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. He's a mindset guy, and it can be difficult to instill a hard mindset into people who don't want it. But a lot of players do like that and do want that. So I think what you said about buy-in is totally right. He's one of these guys where if a kid trusts him and believes in that tough love approach, they'll play well for him.
Right.
And I think he's a good football coach. I think he hires good coaches, and I think he knows how to build a program. So I'm interested to watch Auburn. I have Bama winning the West. I have Arkansas and A&M kind of fighting for a second spot. And then right below them, I have Ole Miss, Auburn, LSU. And you're bold and you're making picks, and that's, tip my cap to you. I don't often make very firm preseason top 25s. I kind of tier it and look at where I think teams are going to be battling it out. So I do think that Auburn could potentially finish third in the West. I think they're going to be fighting with Ole Miss and LSU for it. So
yeah, and I mean, I think Auburn has one of the better running backs in the country in Tank Bigsby if he has an offensive line that can block for him.
Right.
It comes down to quarterback play. Do they have a quarterback that can be above average? Not even spectacular, but above average. And can they win a home game against Penn State? Very early on, they should come into Penn, just like Kentucky had Ole Miss and Florida early on. Auburn has 2 key games in Penn State and LSU. If Auburn wins both of those games, I think that they go 8-4. If they lose both of those games, all bets are off. They could slide to 6-6. The reason why I picked LSU to be 7th, you say it's just a matter of how long it takes for Brian Kelly. I think it only takes a season, but I think that this season they're going to take their lumps. LSU is a tremendously talented football team. They always are. But last year they had a historically bad defense. LSU usually has a hard-nosed, tough defense. Last year they were terrible against the run, against the pass. They gave up points galore. So I'm not sure that they can correct that in a year. And I also am holding my breath to see their quarterback play as well.
Yeah.
I really like the kid that transferred in from Arizona State. I think that he has a lot of talent. He's a dual-threat quarterback. But it's one of those things we have to see how it plays out on the field.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I have Mississippi State rounding up the back end of the West, but Mike Leach has surprised many times in the past, and no doubt he'll surprise many times in the future. They're going to throw the ball around. They're going to score. So it could be, maybe it's something reflexive in me, something embedded, that I just can't put LSU last in the SEC West. It's just hard for me to do. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. There are many instances of excellent head coaches showing up at a program that really needed a tear-down rebuild and having that first year really be a hard one to watch. And there is a potential that happens at LSU this year. I'm not willing to guarantee it at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I really think Alabama and Texas A&M are 1 and 2 in the West, and honestly, I think spots 3 through 7 are pretty flexible, depending on how a couple of key games go for those teams, how they remain healthy, what injuries they face, how their defenses and quarterback play look. Any of those teams could slide all the way to 7th or wind up 3rd in the West. How about this, Mark? Hit us with a couple of your surprise teams that nobody's talking about, that nobody expects anything from, but that you think might have an outside chance of being a good football team this year.
It's interesting. I don't know if I have too many that nobody's talking about. I flipped over to my sheet. I wrote down a couple surprise teams on the top of my head. One of them is LSU, who we're just talking about.
Who I have going 5-7 this year.
You have them going 5-7?
I do.
Yeah, no, it could happen. I'll tell you one. Here's one that people might not be looking at. KU, Kansas. Now, Kansas is not going to be good in the traditional, meaning the actual dictionary definition of the word good, but they're going to be better than they have been from KU standard. People don't watch a lot of Kansas games. Kansas was close a bunch of times last year.
They were competitive.
Very competitive with good teams. With Oklahoma, they took Oklahoma deep into the second half before the Sooners pulled away. West Virginia, TCU, and they seem to get better and tougher as the season went on. They're well coached. I think they built a little confidence. So Kansas would be my outside pick to sneak into. Do they still play the GoDaddy.com Bowl?
If they don't, they should.
If they don't, they should. Whatever the bottom tier of the sponsorship bowl is, I think KU could sneak in. Now, I'm looking at some of these. One team that I could see bouncing back this year, you mentioned them much earlier in the conversation, the University of Washington out west. Washington still has good football players on that team. And what they've added is a proven coaching staff, and particularly a proven offensive coach. I'm sure people realize, because laughing at the Pac-12 struggles is kind of a national pastime right now. But I think the week after UCLA beat LSU last year to start the season in the Rose Bowl, they lost to Fresno State at home, coached by Kalen DeBoer, who's now at Washington. Fresno State was they were just a good football team, and they have a good offense. So I actually think at Washington, with their players, that they turn that thing around quickly. Last year was an anomaly for Washington. Jimmy Lake just wasn't ready. The team was a mess. I was at the Oregon-Washington game when I don't want to exaggerate. He didn't really shove a kid, but he did put hands on a kid and kind of buffed him up on the sideline a little bit, and it led to his ouster. Really, the reasons behind his ouster, that was kind of a pretext for it. It was amazing to see how messy the program had got just that quickly after Chris Peterson left. So Washington, I think, could be back. I actually have your Houston team, and I guess going 12-2, it's not going to be a surprise, but beat Auburn in the Birmingham Bowl, as you said. And then say Tennessee and BYU. BYU has a chance to be good again this year, and then Tennessee kind of is like the Pac-12 team of the SEC East in this sense. They score a lot of points, but can they play defense?
I like that comparison.
So, no offense to the Tennessee people out there, but
yeah, my friend Christy will not like that at all.
Yeah, sorry about that, Christy. It's not personal. And who knows? Maybe their defense is back, and they're playing Tennessee volunteer defense again. So Tennessee's another team. Those are kind of some of the surprise teams. North Carolina State could potentially jump up. If North Carolina State can beat Clemson, North Carolina State could play for an ACC title. So,
that would be wild.
Some of the teams I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think those are phenomenal picks. If Kansas made a bowl game, that would be incredible. It really would.
Yeah.
It really would. And, I mean, their win over Texas last year was one of the highlights of the whole football season for everybody except for Texas fans.
Right. Which is a very unique group, because there are Texas fans and then everybody else who's not Texas fans.
That's right.
Which is, unlike there's a lot of mixed fan bases around the country. Texas is like circle the wagons. Everyone inside is Texas, and then everyone outside is launching in. So, yeah, when they lose those games, man, the country just goes wild.
For sure. Let me ask you this, Mark, and we've talked about this a little bit, but if you had to take a guess now, who do you think wins the Pac-12?
If I'm guessing right now, I have to stick with the chalk in Utah. I think Utah, they limped into the Rose Bowl literally with their roster and their losses, and they put up just a really game fight against Ohio State. I think that Rose Bowl is probably the funnest game of the bowl season last year.
Terrific game.
I think the viewership was higher in the Rose Bowl than both CFP semifinals.
Wow.
As the game went on, as it turned out to be a good game, everybody started tuning in, so it was like well up over 20 million viewers. Utah has the pedigree right now, and Kyle Whittingham is kind of in the final flower of his high-end coaching career. I think Whittingham is just there. He he's got his program, and as long as they keep reloading with the good players that they've got, that they're just going to compete for it until it peters out. I don't know how many years he has like this left, but right now I think he's just kind of the guy. So until Utah gets knocked off, I think it's Utah, with Oregon and Washington in the North being interesting under new coaching staffs.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I really wanted to have Washington as a team to watch, but they just let me down so harshly last year. Last year, I just thought that their defense was going to be so good. I expected their quarterback play to be better. I had them, I think, 9th or 10th, somewhere in there, and it didn't work out. What teams outside of Ohio State and Oklahoma have a legitimate shot to win the Big Ten and the Big 12 conferences?
Michigan, depending on how their defense plays, I think is going to be right there. In fact, Ohio State very well could be Michigan's only loss. Michigan has to go to Iowa City to play the Iowa Hawkeyes, and Iowa not only is tough to beat at home, they have a pretty robust history of upsetting really good Michigan teams in Iowa City.
They do.
So that's going to be, and if not upsetting them outright, very tight games. I mean, just down to the wire, last minutes of the fourth quarter, overtime games, etc. But if Michigan gets through that, I really think Ohio State could be their only loss. That may be, by the way, you asked about my journey last year. I may round out this year with the return game in Columbus. I was at the game last year in Ann Arbor, incredible game. I do want to get to one at the Horseshoe, and that could be this year. So
would be phenomenal.
Yeah, it could be really cool. And Michigan that'll really be a prove-it game for Michigan. You did it at home last year, snowy conditions. Can you go on the road this year and stand up to the Buckeye Beast again? That can be really hard to do 2 years in a row. So Michigan, and then in the West, I want to say that an Iowa or a Wisconsin is capable of it, and I do think they are capable. But I think it's a really long shot, and things would have to really break right. So Penn State could jump up. Oh, hey, by the way, I wanted to tip my cap to Auburn. I'm jumping off on something right now, but I just remember this. I saw the game last year. It was the 4th time ever Auburn had played a Big Ten team.
Wow.
That should be higher, in my opinion, in this sport. But that aside, I really salute teams, particularly from the SEC. The SEC does not have a long history of traveling out of region to play peer universities.
No, they don't.
They play at neutral sites. They like those games in Atlanta. They like those games in New Orleans, etc. They'll invite teams from outside in, but they don't often go on the road to play peer universities. And I wish they did more of that. So I tip my cap to Auburn for going up to Penn State, and then Penn State playing the home and home with Auburn. And when I was living out in Los Angeles, Auburn did a home and home with USC.
Yep, I remember those games.
I saw the USC game in the Coliseum in 2002, and then they went back to Auburn in 2003. And that stuff, that is college football to me. That is what needs to be happening, rather than these early season games against 1AA schools or really the worst of the FBS. I want to see these big schools play each other in their home ballparks. Those are the most fun games.
Yeah, I agree. And I remember when USC made their return trip to Auburn, I was in Jordan-Hare Stadium with my dad for that game. Prior to the game starting, we felt so good about that. USC had a freshman quarterback that was starting, and we thought a true freshman quarterback at a night game in Jordan-Hare, we're about to eat this guy alive.
Right.
It was Matt Leinart. I think if I remember, it was like 20-0 was the score, or 23-0. It was bad. I just remember it being bad, and
it was either 23 or 19-0.
It was bad, and we heard that there's a thing that the USC band plays when they get a first down or have a big play or score a touchdown. We heard it all night long. It was It was horrible, but it's a good memory now, despite the loss. So I think in the Big Ten, I think you're right. It's Ohio State. Michigan maybe has an outside chance. A couple teams in the Big Ten that I like that just aren't quite there, but at least can make things interesting to me are Minnesota and Purdue.
Sure. Purdue, the spoiler makers, as they call them.
Yeah, I think those teams will at least put up enough points I really like PJ Fleck. I think that he's a good coach. If they pull a couple of key upsets, they could really shake things up in the Big Ten. Mark, what about the Big 12? Outside of Oklahoma, who has a realistic shot to win the conference?
Yeah, outside of Oklahoma, what's going to happen with Texas? Who is Sark?
Yeah.
It's the same old hype. It's the same old everything. You want to say Texas could jump up. You want to say that offense could catch fire. I was at the Texas at Arkansas game last year when Sark was starting his young quarterback, and he was running this incredibly complex, elaborate offense. You could see it live. These deep breaking routes, these mini limbed trees out on the field, and his quarterback was getting absolutely lit up. And so he went with the backup, who's now playing in Nebraska. He's playing. He transferred to Nebraska now. But anyway, Sark substituted him into the game and started running this really stripped down, bare bones offense because it was just too complex for his guys to run, and they couldn't get enough time to throw the football and run the routes. So you give Sark credit for stripping down the offense and trying to find something that worked rather than forcing his own design. But how often can you do that? Texas had a really bad second half of the season last year.
Yeah.
And can they come back this year and do what Sark wants to do offensively? I don't know. So outside of Oklahoma, I think Baylor and Okie State are both really interesting. I think they both could have an opportunity to play for a Big 12 championship, potentially win. And outside of that, man, just putting Texas kind of – Baylor, Oklahoma State would be my next two with an opportunity. And then Texas is the weird wild card. A chance, depending on how well they play, to be good enough to win the Big 12. But I think Oklahoma is the favorite. Baylor, Okie State behind the Sooners.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Baylor and Oklahoma State should be the better teams in the conference, but history and talent level tell us that Oklahoma very easily could be. I like Dave Aranda. I think Dave Aranda is a phenomenal coach. If I was LSU, he would have been my top choice. I would have backed up the Brinks truck and tried to get him over to LSU. And as far as Texas goes, what's going to happen is they're going to lose to Alabama 63-17, and then they have pieces to pick up. Hopefully they stay healthy and they can come back from that. I just don't see them having the depth on the offensive and the defensive lines to stack up with a top team like that yet. And I think the jury is still out on Sark as a head coach overall.
Big time.
So let me ask you this, Mark, as we're getting ready to wrap up. I know you're more of a college football historian. As you said, you put teams into tiers, not necessarily make predictions. But if you had to make a guess right now leading into the season, what four teams would you say have the best shot of making the college football playoff?
Yeah, sure. By the way, that quarterback's name is Casey Thompson.
Casey Thompson, that's right.
His father was Charles Thompson, who was kind of the last great wishbone quarterback for Barry Switzer at Oklahoma.
Very cool.
And what I want to know from Casey is, does he hate his father? Because he played at Texas and then transferred to Nebraska.
Yeah, he went from a big rival to what used to be a very big rival as well. That's true. That's true.
Right. It's a really interesting journey from him. So just to get that name down, I was getting him confused with Charles Johnson of Colorado, who we talked about earlier.
Right.
I believe just passed away.
Oh.
Yeah. So playoff. I wish I could tell you something neat's going to happen and we're going to get some really interesting playoff. I see this as like the Empire Strikes Back for Cincinnati last year.
Right.
I think Alabama and Ohio State, barring anything crazy, are going to the playoff. And I think it's likely Clemson and Georgia behind those two. Outside of those, pretty short list and major question marks. Notre Dame, I have no idea what Notre Dame's going to be like. They've won the offseason with their coaching hire and
I love Marcus Freeman
videos, and Notre Dame blew a big lead in their bowl game last year in the first opportunity with the new coach in charge. Not really his fault. You don't really put that on him. He didn't have time to build it. But we're going to find out what kind of head coach he is. So Notre Dame's on my list, but that's with the caveat. I don't know what Notre Dame's going to be like. OU, once again with OU. OU, when you talk about other teams winning the Big 12, here's why other teams could win it, more experienced teams. Oklahoma has lost like 70% of their production from last season.
Wow. That's a huge number.
Huge. I mean, huge. And it's literally like, I think it might be 70% on one side, and it's approaching 70% if it's not right there. So, new coaching staff, new players. Brent Venables is a very proven coordinator, but a lot of proven coordinators don't pan out as head coaches.
Very true.
So we're going to find out about Brent Venables. So Oklahoma is also on my list, but I don't know much about Oklahoma. Utah, I think, may have an opportunity. Pac-12 the last few years has traditionally suffered a late season loss that has kind of knocked their team out that other conferences don't have to deal with. Other major conferences don't have to do it. They can lose a game, even their conference championship game, and get right back into the playoff. Whereas the Pac-12 at this point really has to run the table. So if Utah can go undefeated, maybe one loss, and win the Pac-12, I think Utah has a shot. Oregon, another long shot. I don't know what Oregon's going to be like. So I'm really chalk heavy, man. Bama, Buckeyes, Clemson, UGA. I really think they're kind of prohibitive behemoths this season.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree with you. I think that it's Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and everybody else. I hate to say it, but that's just how I see things. Even in my scenario with Kentucky winning the SEC East, if that's Georgia's only loss of the year and then Alabama blows out Kentucky, it's possible for Georgia to still make the playoff. We've seen it happen before. Teams like Baylor, NC State, Clemson, Notre Dame, Oregon, USC, and Utah, those teams could possibly upset the apple cart. But really, I think we're looking at a handful of teams to fill the last spot in the playoff. I think that 3 out of the 4 spots, nothing in college football is set in stone, but I think that Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State are certainly the prohibitive favorite.
Yeah, I agree with that. They're just too loaded, too stacked, too much experience, everything's just lining up too nicely for them.
For sure.
I see it going that way, definitely.
Well, Mark, share with our audience where they can follow you on social media, how they can best keep up with your journey, how they can check in with you on a regular basis.
Yeah, I would say find me at Twitter, Fifth Down College Football. In my Twitter bio, I have a Linktree link, and if you hit the Linktree, you can get all my stuff. You can get the Instagram, you can get the YouTube. I'm starting to push out more videos on YouTube. I'm starting to get back onto Instagram. I got so many photos, so many videos from last year. I'll have some more from this year. And then I'm fairly active on Twitter. Sometimes I post and go away, but if you want to chat on Twitter, I'll be there if you shoot a message. So, yeah, Twitter's probably the spot. That's where I put on most of my stuff. And then the website, fifthdowncfb.com, if you want to go over there and check out the articles and videos and stuff. I got a lot of stuff for the college football fan and aficionado.
Awesome. Well, check out the website, fifthdowncfb.com. Follow Mark on Twitter at Fifth Down College Football. He's a worthwhile follow. His articles are worth reading. Great college football mind. He's really starting to blow up. Can't wait until this book comes out. Seen him all over radio, and the conversations that he's having on YouTube are certainly worth checking out as well. This has been our In the Shed with Wes Anderson college football preview show. Mark, I can't thank you enough for your time, for your generosity, for joining us this evening, for not eviscerating me on my just ludicrous predictions. Thank you for being on the show tonight.
I've seen far worse predictions, Wes. Don't be too hard on yourself for those. And absolutely, my pleasure. Glad to be on for the preview episode, and thanks for having me. And we'll talk down the road.
My pleasure. That's all for this week. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I can't either. It's back in the house and out of the shed for me. Thanks again for listening to episode 49. Make sure to subscribe, like, share, and review. It really does help. If you have any paranormal experiences, opinions about sports, or politics that you'd like to share, you can email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Again, that's intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. I might even read it on air. Look for us on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, the Good Pods app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to follow us on Twitter at InTheShed4. Tune in again next week when we'll hit the headlines, talk some sports, and take a look at the O.J. Simpson case together. This has been In the Shed with Wes Anderson, the best news show in the land covering politics, sports, and the paranormal. Have an adventurous and fulfilling weekend. I'll catch you tools later. Peace out, Boy Scout. Meemaw, we made it!